Hello, everyone. My name is Gilda Ross. I'm the Glenbard Student and Community Projects Coordinator. I am thrilled about this conversation with Dr. Crawford. She was with us about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, and we couldn't wait to have her back, and especially to talk about this very, very important book. You Are Not Alone for Parents and Caregivers with advice from experts and wisdom from real families. So glad that you're here for this very important hour. Again, it's our 30th year, and we couldn't be more excited with this presentation. And there's so many people that are joining us because they also wanted to be a part of this. We have Jerry Kruger. She is the CEO and president of NAMI DuPage. She will read the introductions. We have Broderick Booth. He is the assistant principal at Glenbard East High School. He also wanted to be a part of this. I'm delighted. We have Reverend James Shannon. He's the school board member at the Glenbard Schools. And again, I think he was with us last time as well. Everybody wants to be a part of this really important program. Before we begin, I want to mention upcoming events. Live Life Well Week is about to start in our area. The theme this year, with our students in mind, and they came up with the theme, is Your Story is Just Beginning. This week, tomorrow, in fact, we have Jody Norgard on February 11th. This is a hybrid event. Jody Norgard has written a book called More Than a Doll. It's about her entrepreneurial journey, coming up with the Go-Go Sport doll, which she eventually sold very successfully to Mattel, and it's an inspiring story. So I hope you'll join us. We will be at the College DuPage at noon with a hybrid, and then we will be at Glenbard West at 7 p.m. Again, a hybrid. So join us if you can and let someone know. Then on Thursday of next week, we have Ellen Broughton. Ellen's first book was Bright Kids Who Couldn't Care Less. And now she'll be talking about her other book, her most recent book, Bright Kids Who Can't Keep Up. That is on February 19th. I hope that you will join us noon or 7 p.m. Then another special event, a highlight of Live Life Well Week. We have Dr. Garcia speaking to students during the day. And then on Tuesday, February 24th, she will be in person, a hybrid also, at Glenbard West in the library. There will be a community resource fair at 6 o'clock, lots of prizes. And if you're in the area and able to join us, I really encourage you. She'll be talking about from self-doubt to self-worth. So that's that's on the 24th. Then we go into March, and Melinda Moyer will be back, and it's about raising kids in terrifying times, the strength to survive and thrive. She's hilarious, and she'll be with us about an important topic on March 3rd. I hope you can come back and join us. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Broderick. Do you want to say a few words before we start?
Sure thing. First off, I just want to say welcome to Dr. Crawford, and to all that are in attendance. It's definitely our pleasure to work alongside you, Gilda, and everyone involved with our GPS program. And as we know, mental health is such an important topic. Historically, it's been deemed taboo in some homes, communities, um, and households. But we certainly have the goal of making some of these topics more speakable. We want to be able to provide resources and help guide conversations with families and students moving forward to remove that taboo nature that's been associated with mental health historically. So,
Thank
welcome.
you, Frederick. I appreciate that. And Dr. Shannon joins me in the welcome. He's coming back for a question. And now, Jerry, to you. Jerry Kruger, CEO and president of NAMI DuPage. Take
Thank
it
you,
away.
Gilda. First of all, I'd like to express our sincere thanks to GPS and Gilda for their partnership through the years and in making today's program possible. GPS is truly an extraordinary resource for our community, and we are grateful for their collaboration and commitment to mental health awareness. It is my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Dr. Christine Crawford. Dr. Crawford is a board certified child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist, and she serves as the Associate Medical Director for NAMI National. NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, the largest grassroots mental health organization in the United States. NAMI DuPage is one of 600 affiliates, and we really provide the boots on the ground for support, education, and advocacy in our local community. In Dr. Crawford's role, she works to advance mental health education, reduce stigma, and increase access to culturally responsive care across communities. She is a respected clinician, educator, and a national voice on issues affecting youth mental health, families, and communities. I first had the opportunity to hear Dr. Crawford speak 2 years ago at the NAMI National Conference. What struck me immediately was her remarkable presence. She brings together deep clinical expertise with genuine warmth and compassion. Her ability to explain complex mental health topics in a way that feels accessible, practical, and hopeful makes her an exceptional speaker and a trusted voice for families and professionals alike. You will find that she combines science with empathy and expertise with a truly human approach to care. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Christine Crawford.
Thank you. Thank you. And Jerry, what an amazing introduction. Thank you so much. And I'm so happy that we were able to have you join us. And thank you again for putting together the watch party. And also thank you so much, Gilda, for bringing me in. And you guys are such a welcoming community. So I really appreciate an opportunity to speak with you all today. All right, so let's jump into it because there's lots and lots to talk about, but not too much that will overwhelm you, that sort of thing. But just wanting to make sure that we have enough time to really take a deep dive into all of this. Now, I did it backwards. Hold on. Now I'm going to share my screen. Here we go.
Perfect.
Okay. All
Great.
right. Okay, so the title of this talk is You Are Not Alone, and wondering whether or not the kids are okay. Wondering how it is as parents we can talk to our kids who are struggling. A lot of us are struggling in general with finding the right words to use in our conversations with our kids when it comes to their mental health. Broderick said something that was really important as a great way to kick off this conversation is that this topic of mental health in a lot of households and a lot of families, this is a topic that should become more speakable within the home, within the families. But the problem is folks really struggle to find and figure out what are those right words to use when we're talking about our mental health. And so I really hope that this conversation today will provide you with a little bit more clarity around talking about mental health, the importance of talking about it, but more importantly, to give you things to actually say, some tools and strategies that you can use so that you can feel more empowered when you are having these conversations. So I think it's important for us to look at the numbers, the statistics, so we can really get a greater appreciation and have an understanding as to how big of a deal youth mental health is. Uh, okay. Um, so one of the things that's important for us to take in consideration is that mental health symptoms don't just develop when people are adults. Kids are experiencing significant mental health challenges. It is possible. We know that they are, especially young children. So we know that 50% of all lifetime cases of mental illness begin by age 14 and 75% by age 24. So that means that we certainly should be focusing on youth mental health because that's when all the symptoms emerge, 50% of those cases. Okay. The other thing too is that recent U.S. national data shows that 4 in 10 high school students report persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness in the past year. That's 40%. Almost half of students are feeling sad most days. And about 20% of teens have actually considered attempting suicide over the past year. 20%. And symptoms of anxiety in teens, they're quite high. Roughly 1 in 5 youth report having symptoms of anxiety. And the concern that I have, as well as other parents have, when it comes to kids experiencing sadness or hopelessness, significant anxiety, having thoughts that life is no longer worth living, it's clear that these things are having an impact on how these teens are able to function day in and day out. It's all about functioning. So if a kid has poor mental health, it's going to be hard for them to engage in all the things that they need to be engaging in, including school, including forming relationships with their peers, coming up with their own dreams and hopes for their future. These mental health symptoms impair their ability to function and their ability to do the things they need to do. The other reason why it's important to focus on youth mental health is that kids are really struggling compared to adults. Now, I know that this data is a bit old, but the trend is still there to this day. So, this graph shows the percentage of the population with a major depressive episode in the past year. And in the orange, you could see are people who are over the age of 26. And generally speaking, kind of the rates of depression have remained somewhat steady. But you could see, since 2011 or so, that for our teens and our young adults, rates of depression just continue to go up, and they are still going up to this day. Now, when I talk about youth mental health, it's important to realize that lives are at stake. A lot of people think that when I refer to youth mental health, that's talking about how kids just don't know how to cope with the things that they should be able to cope with. These kids are too sensitive, they are too much into, self-care, and they're too much into themselves. No, 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 that's not what this is about. This is about people's lives, right? And we know that there are certain groups of young people who are far more impacted by mental health issues, and so much so that it can have an impact on their longevity. So we know that kids who are part of the LGBTQ plus community are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide compared to straight youth. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among teens between the ages of 14 to 18. And just think about that for a little bit. It feels like it's something that's avoidable. It's something that we're able to prevent. It's the second leading cause of death amongst teens. And when it comes to certain populations, what we also know is that Black children between the ages of 5 to 12 are 2 times more likely to die by suicide compared to white kids of the same age. Now, I want everyone to just stop and think. This data I just shared with you, this stat I just shared with you, included kids as young as 5. Adults find it incredibly hard to even comprehend the idea that a 5-year-old would contemplate suicide, but they are. And what we need to be aware of is that even though the worlds of young kids are quite small, the world of a 5-year-old is very small. If they were to experience a disappointment or a stressor of some sort, that is a big thing in a really small world. And it's a big thing in their small world, and yet these kids don't have the tools, the experience to be able to navigate that really big thing. And that's why, for some kids of that age, they don't know what to do. And if they have heard about it or they've seen a history of suicide in their family, then perhaps that might be something that comes to mind. But we should not minimize or invalidate any sort of stress that a young kid, even a kid as young as 5, is going through, because they could have significant difficulty imagining how they're going to get through that struggle that they're facing right now. I love having these talks with people who aren't in the mental health field. I love talking to parents and people who are in the school systems because honestly, there has to be a shared sense of responsibility when it comes to taking care of the mental health of young people in this country, because there's not enough of folks like me, child and adolescent psychiatrists. There's some data that suggests that there are between 8,300 to 10,000 child and adolescent psychiatrists across the country. Only 10,000. That is just not enough. And this graph that you could see over here on the right, you could see that there's a significant shortage of child and adolescent psychiatrists across the country. Now, the overwhelming majority of the country is experiencing a severe shortage. That's what you see all in red. Now, I'm from Massachusetts and we're a little bit better off, but we're still experiencing a high shortage of child and adolescent psychiatrists. So, what that means is that there are a lot of kids who are struggling, but they don't have access to the supports that they need, especially when it comes to the particular tools that a psychiatrist is able to provide them. Thinking about states like Wyoming, there's only 6 adolescent psychiatrists per 100,000 children. In Idaho, only 5. And look at this, South Dakota, only 1 child and adolescent psychiatrist per 100,000 children. And the American Association for Child and Adolescent Psychiatrists estimates that we need about 47 per 100,000 kids in order to meet the growing demand. So there's not enough of us. We know there's a growing demand, and that what that results in is a significant delay in kids getting the treatment that they need. This stat right here at the bottom really, really I find to be upsetting, but it's actually true. And it's data that NAMI was able to identify that the average delay between onset of mental health symptoms and treatment is 11 years. 11 years. Kids do not have 11 years. They really don't. And that's why we oftentimes see folks who are, young adults or later on in adulthood, experiencing more severe symptoms that are interfering with their ability to function, interfering with their relationships. And because they're an adult, it's a little bit easier for them to seek out help for themselves. But for kids, a lot of adults don't know how to recognize some of the symptoms in kids. They don't know what to do when they see some of the symptoms in kids. And then when there is a concern, there's no one to go to. And so that contributes to this weight. And only half of kids who actually have a mental health condition receive treatment. So there's a lot of people who are going untreated. The other thing that I like to talk about is what this looks like in schools, because schools, as you all know, the teachers who are on this call, you guys are really on the front lines of this youth mental health crisis because you see kids all day, every day. And you also have the knowledge base of what kids of a certain age group typically look like. So you're able to identify behaviors, certain patterns that might deviate from what you typically see in kids of that age. So I love partnering with folks in the schools because the amount of data that you're able to provide myself as a psychiatrist provide the families about what this kid looks like in school is invaluable because you really get to know them, you get to see them every day, and you get to spend a lot of time with them. But what teachers are noticing is that kids are really having a hard time dealing with the internal experiences that they have because they don't know how to articulate those internal experiences, those internal feelings. They don't have the language quite yet. So we might see kids being more emotionally reactive. We can see evidence of behavioral dysregulation. These are all fancy words to say the kid is disruptive and acting out in class. Or we might see the opposite, where a kid is just shutting down. Their head is down, they're not engaged in any sort of way. We also see that there are kids who might be taking more visits to the nurse's office, complaining of stomach aches and headaches. And as a parent, you might be receiving phone calls from the nurse's office, saying again, oh, Jimmy is here complaining of a headache or complaining of a stomach ache. And you focus on the actual physical complaint, which is important, but we also have to be curious as to why there might be a pattern of visits to the nurses for stomach ache or headache and what might be actually contributing to it. Because oftentimes it might be anxiety, it might be depression, it might be some sort of mental health related issue that's causing physical issues that is experienced by the child. We also see kids having difficulty being able to focus, concentrate, if there are any transitions. And then the other big thing that is just kind of a big red flag for all of us is if we see a change in academic performance, if we see that there's a decline in their performance. And so when I do see that a kid who is doing well or doing okay, and then I start to see them drop off, I'm thinking, okay, what is going on with this kid in terms of what is happening inside? Are they experiencing some sort of distress that's interfering with their academic performance? Rather than me automatically thinking, oh, this kid is not good at math or this kid is not good at reading. That might also be the case, but I also hold in mind what is this kid going through inside that makes it hard for them to do their schoolwork? And why aren't the kids okay? What is going on in this day and age that makes it such that kids are really struggling? I know a lot of people like to point the finger at something when it comes to assigning blame for the emotional difficulties that kids are experiencing. But I do wonder about kids in this day and age who have access to so much information about what's happening in their community and what's happening outside of their communities. Now, back in the day, in order to find out what was happening outside of your community, what was happening nationally or around the world, you would have to sit down every day for the 6:30 news to find out what was going on. But right now, in this day and age, a kid just got to look at their cell phone on the lock screen and they're getting all the notifications about breaking news, about what is happening. And for a young kid's mind, especially when they don't have the tools yet to be able to deal with the stress of hearing about these ongoing bad things, it can be incredibly overwhelming, can be incredibly distressing, and it can really make it hard for them to function and to be able to focus on what they need to focus on in school. So I do think that technology, cell phones, and the information that comes through it can be overwhelming. There's also social media, and we've been talking a lot about social media over the years, but I think that kids just looking at images of people who they know at school, kids who are their same age, and they see what their lives are like. But they don't realize that the pictures that are being selected to be posted on these different social media platforms are all intentional. They're being curated. But as a young kid who, again, doesn't have the tools or the experiences, you just make the assumption that everyone's living a great life and for some reason you're not. And so that whole comparison anxiety, the sadness and the depression that comes along with the comparison based off of what kids are seeing on social media, that also has been contributing to some of the distress that I see. Um, so it's really a challenge because parents are parenting kids at a time that is new. And as parents, we acquired our parenting strategies from the strategies that our parents used when we were kids. And so we kind of go back to the past, we use those strategies on our kids who are living today, and then we get frustrated about why they're not responding. We get frustrated about why things continue to get worse. But it's because we have to use a different set of parenting tools to parent kids of this day and age. And that's a hard thing to accept and to take in. And that's why we need to continue to educate ourselves about what the worlds, what the lives of our kids look like. So, educating ourselves about social media, educating ourselves about AI, so that we can be able to tap into parenting strategies that can be most effective for parenting in 2026. So, all of this, talking about having access to information about what's happening in other parts of the world, not having the tools yet for being able to manage distress that's related to hearing about bad things, whether it's natural disasters, war, anything. Those kids can experience the trauma that other people who are experiencing in trauma, they can experience some of those symptoms through what is called vicarious trauma. So this is the process of experiencing significant amounts of stress just by hearing about something bad happening elsewhere. This is all related to hearing about someone else's trauma or maybe even witnessing someone else's trauma. And this can come through a whole host of ways. It could be actually seeing something like a car accident on the side of the road, and a young kid can experience a lot of distress because of that. Or it could be something they saw on TV. It could be about hearing about someone's story, a traumatic story. And especially on all these video-based social media platforms, you're actually seeing the person who is living through the trauma. You could see the emotional distress that they're in, and that can feel very real to a kid. Now, there are certain reasons why some kids might hold on to the stress related to hearing about the traumatic incident to someone else more so than other people. A lot of it has to do with certain risk factors like personal history. So maybe if you've had a previous experience as a child or even as a parent of going through something similar, that might trigger some strong emotions for you. Or if you're going through something right now that relates to the bad thing you just happened. And also thinking about the cultural context of it all, that there may be certain folks who might be more sensitive to bad things happening to other people because of the way in which they walk this world, because of the color of their skin, because of their sexual orientation, what have you. And we could see a wide range of reactions or responses to vicarious trauma. And what I say to parents, whenever you're noticing a change in your kid's behavior, your kid is trying to communicate something to you. They're trying to communicate that they're experiencing something that's hard, but they might not have what is labeled the right behavior or the right sort of response. But that's why kind of learning about vicarious trauma and kind of noticing or being able to appreciate if there's a shift in the way in which the kid is functioning, that should get you curious as to what might be driving some of that. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But some of the responses that you might actually see include social isolation. We see kids who do what's called doom scrolling, and so they get stuck in these algorithms on their social media platforms that over time starts to go from having broad sorts of topics that are coming through the reel to things that are more geared towards a specific incident that is clear that they are spending a lot of time or expressing a lot of interest in because they're lingering on some of these videos. And so these algorithms on these platforms can actually exacerbate some mental health symptoms because it makes it such that the world that this kid is exposed to on their phones is very limited, which can heighten anxiety and paranoia. We also see that there's some kids who find that they are responsible for finding solutions, and that could be quite distressing. We see kids who might have nightmares, see kids who are ruminating, thinking about these things over and over and over again. They might be angry about this. And we also see kids who are struggling with their sleep, with their appetite, low energy, low motivation. We could see all of these things, and when we do, we have to be curious about it. I always say to folks, and this was a quote that I got from another amazing psychologist, is that kids are doing the best that they can with the brains that they have. And us as adults, we can look at how a kid is behaving, the emotional responses that a kid has, and we're like, what is going on here? This doesn't make any sense. Why are you doing this? And we like are pulling our hairs and be like, why did you do that? That didn't make any sense. But it actually makes sense given the stage of neurodevelopment that kid might be in at that moment of time. So I'm going to explain this in very, very simple ways. Hopefully, there are no neuroscientists on the call, but in very simplistic terms, when it comes to the developing child brain, the back part of the brain tends to develop a lot faster than the front part. Back part of the brain is really responsible for our emotional responses. They're responsible for storing our memories and assigning an emotional sort of connection to that memory. And so, if we happen to experience something traumatic or we experience something that feels threatening, the back part of our brain, the amygdala, the fear center, it's going to be activated. It's going to be like, "Oh my God, I should run away. I should oh my God, I don't know what to do, and you freeze or you fight, and you know you have to lean in. And so those sort of reactions might happen at a far quicker pace or faster pace than, say, in an adult who has their prefrontal cortex more fully formed, where that person can look at a particular threat, experience a certain bad event, and think to themselves, okay, how can I kind of work through this bad thing that happened? Is this actually a threatening situation? They can basically pump the brakes on that emotional response. And so those connections are quite strong in the back part of the brain and the emotional parts, but the front part and that connection to the back is not that great. So kids being able to pump the brakes and think through how they're going to react and respond to a situation is not that great. And that's why they tend to be a little bit more emotional, not a little bit, but they tend to be more emotional in these sort of situations. Now, I know a lot of people understand fight or flight, and we oftentimes see kids who are quite distressed, who are in this yellow area here, where their fight or flight response is activated. They're either running away, they have a sense of anxiety, fear, they're panicking, or they're angry, or they're frustrated. These are all things that we can see. And we could see these things in a kid. And those are the kids who actually may be more likely to get help and support from an adult. But I worry about these kids who have a freeze response whenever they hear about something bad or when they experience something bad. These are the kids who shut down. They might feel hopeless. They might feel helpless. They might have this experience in which they feel detached from their body and not fully present. They might experience depression. These are the kids in the classroom who are not engaged, their heads are down. These are the kids in your home who are coming home from school, going straight to their bedroom and doors closed. They're just not engaging. But these are the kids who often don't get the help that they need, don't get the adults kind of leaning in more to be curious. It's oftentimes the folks who are clearly having a very obvious response. Now, the way in which we can regulate the intensity of the physiological response to a stressful event is we can use the process that's known as co-regulation. Now, not to get into too much psychobabble, jumble, jumble talk, but this is important to hold in mind. When we think about co-regulation, that is reminding me of when we have a baby or when we're around a baby. When a baby is experiencing distress, the baby cries, oh, wah, wah, wah. We go over to the baby, we hold the baby, we bring the baby close, and we rock the baby, and we say, everything's gonna be all right. We say it in a calming way. The baby is able to feel how calm our breathing is, how calm our heart rate is, and then the baby calms down. And over time, that baby actually internalizes um, yeah, can actually internalize how it is to calm yourself down. But what ends up happening is as a kid ages, we think that our need to um, provide this co-regulation, we think that kids don't need it as much because they seem to be more self-sufficient. They're able to do things on their own. It seems like they're able to come up with their own strategies for how to manage. And so we might back off a little bit. But what co-regulation really is, in addition to that example I just provided with the baby, it really is about providing a supportive environment. It's an interactive process where caregivers help children manage emotions and physiological states through warm, attuned responses. what does that actually look like? And what are some things that we can think about doing for our older kids who are still experiencing a lot of distress? That fight or flight or freeze response is happening. They're becoming dysregulated. What can we do, especially for those older kids? What we can do consistently each and every day, as best as we can, is we could provide predictable routines. We can be a calm presence for them. We can set clear expectations and have some flexibility in that. We can name emotions without problem solving. We can model regulation under stress. I'm just going to go into detail about these things really quickly, working backwards. The way that we can co regulate by modeling regulation is whenever we are experiencing stress within the home, and our kids are always noticing us, they're always watching us. Say if you were to experience something really annoying at home, sometimes our reaction is, oh my God, this is so annoying. And my boss, he did this and that and blah, 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 blah. But instead, what you could think about doing is you can still have that conversation or still kind of, vocalize your distress by say it in this sort of manner. Oh, my goodness, I'm so frustrated with my boss. They are so frustrating. And because of that, I'm just feeling like my chest is getting really tight. I'm noticing I'm talking really fast. I'm pacing around because I am so angry and frustrated by what my boss just did. So, Jimmy, little Jimmy, I just want to let you know that I'm just going to take a walk around the block just for a little bit so that I can feel a little bit better. So I want to let you know that's why I'm going to go out for a walk. That's why I'm leaving. It's not because you did anything. It's just mommy needs to kind of calm down a little bit before we can reconnect. I know that sounds like to a lot of folks, oh, in the heat of the moment, how is one going to do that? But just even for small things to kind of verbalize or think out loud what it is you're going through emotionally and how it is you are regulating them yourself so that your kids actually can learn these tools and strategies. A lot of parents also, because people have access to so much information about mental health related conditions, they might just provide a diagnosis for a set of experiences and emotions that a kid has. And so it's better to, name the emotions rather than saying, you are depressed or saying, you must have ADHD, but to name the emotion of, wow, you're feeling sad, you're feeling, hopeless, you're feeling confused, without jumping into labeling, without jumping into problem solving. Because we also want kids to get in a better habit of understanding how it is they experience different emotional states so that they can better understand what are some of the cues in their bodies that might signal that they have this emotional state that's about to come up so that they know how to prevent it. Calm adult presence, I kind of touched into that, and predictable routines, like knowing what to expect, can just make kids feel a little bit more at ease and not on high alert because they don't know what's going to happen. And being in that state of like hypervigilance or that state of like being alert, you're already kind of like at a step above in terms of like your physiological state, in terms of being in a state of stress. So then when something bad does happen, the response to the bad thing is much more bigger because you're already in this state of like, oh my God, what's going to happen next, what's going to happen next. So it's really helpful to provide predictable routines in the home. Now, I talked a little bit about co-regulation, how we tend to think about that primarily when it comes to babies, when it comes to very young kids. But as time goes on, yeah, kids do not need as much of our presence to help with regulation. That goes down over time, but they still need it when they get older. They still need that adult co regulation to fill up their bucket of tools and strategies that they can internalize for how it is to respond to stressful, bad things. This is important to do because, as you all know, kids' brains are still developing. And so when kids are able to have their brains form all of these important connections between the front part of the brain, the back part of the brain, um, between the parts of the brain that have to do with decision making, or the reward center, the part that, responds to certain things, and make it such that they are more inclined to do the thing that gives them the more short-term reward rather than pausing the brakes and things. Like, if we want all of those things to happen, we have to provide an environment. We have to provide kind of like this bubble around the kid so that these connections in the brain can form in a better way, and to make sure that the end product of all of the connections, the architecture that is basically being built during these years, is really strong, and it's good, right? Um, the other thing too is that we oftentimes, when we see kids who are acting out in the moment, we tend to say to these kids, "Why are you doing that? You should have done this instead. Why did you do that? I don't understand. This is what's going to happen to you because you did this, blah, 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 blah." But you're doing a lot of talking at a kid who's in a state of hyperarousal. They're in the state in which their brain, their physiology is just focused on fight or flight or freeze. They're not able to really take in and retain all of the things that you're saying. So it's really important to have a conversation once things have calmed down about why it is this kid did what they did, talking about the potential consequences, and then talking about ways in which the kid could have responded or reacted differently. The other thing, too, about some of these kids in this day and age, that us as parents need to be aware of, that might be contributing to some of their stress and how they respond to their distress, is social media, as I mentioned before. But it's important for us to know, and I know everyone on this call realizes that nearly all teens use social media daily. Um, and a lot of teens are using social media as their way to seek out mental health related information. Let me tell you, kids are using TikTok as a search function. They are. They're not going to Google. But what I hope is that by you all attending this session, educating yourself more about youth mental health, that kids over time will see that you are comfortable talking about mental health issues and would reach out to you about a mental health related issue prior to asking TikTok. And then TikTok will bring them to like a 13-year-old who lives in Iowa who's talking about how to manage anxiety. You want the kid to come to you first. And I had mentioned that online content can actually amplify distress because of the algorithm and how focused the algorithm can become, and can exacerbate some anxiety that the kid might have because it keeps showing the same thing over and over again. And there's a lot of misinformation that's also online too. They say that about 84% of the mental health advice on TikTok is misleading, and 14% of the videos on TikTok that are misleading, they could actually be potentially damaging. And some of the conditions that a lot of kids tend to search for that are associated with a lot of misleading information is ADHD, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, depression, and anxiety. So again, we want kids to come to us first before going to social media, while at the same time, we have to um, acknowledge the fact that social media is not going away. So simply telling your kid, delete this social media app. You need to get off of your phone. You need to stop using TikTok. That's like telling us adults, you guys need to stop using Google. It would make absolutely no sense to us because it's like a part of our world. Now in 2026, I'm starting to think I should say it's like telling us millennials or older to stop using ChatGPT as a search function. It means that for kids, TikToks, Snapchat, all of these platforms, it's a way of life. It's a way of connecting with their peers. So the idea of taking away the thing that connects them to other people, other teens, it's like unfathomable to a kid. So that's why we really have to educate ourselves about social media, about how the algorithms work, so that we can be more informed whenever we're engaged in a conversation with our kids. So what does that actually look like really quickly? I highly recommend that all parents download these apps, whatever platform it is, and so that you can familiarize yourself with the app, with how it works. And then when you see your kids sitting on the couch and doing the thing that they typically do, they'll just sit on the couch on their phone scrolling, you can sit next to them and you can look at what are some of the things that keep popping up in their algorithm, because that will give you some insight as to what it is your kid is thinking about, what it is your kid is searching for. And if you notice that there's a pattern of some of the content that's coming up, for example, you're noticing that there's a lot of content about anxiety, about dieting, then you could be curious with your kid. Oh, I notice just sitting next to you, there's like a lot of videos about anxiety. I'm just curious as to why that is. I'm curious about what it is that you're learning. And that way you can, again, engage in a conversation with your kid, but also learn more about uh, your kid. So, what do we need to do as parents? When should we act and respond? And I had mentioned earlier, it's all about noticing if there's a change in how your kid is functioning day in and day out. And to notice if there's a pattern in how they are functioning over time. So, not to just focus on these one off moments where a kid might overreact or do something bad, but you want to see if there's a particular pattern of behavior. You want to see how it impacts their academic performance, how it's impacting their relationships with others, but also how is it impacting their ability to take care of themselves, to sleep, to get out of bed, to eat. That's also an indicator of functioning. In my book that thank you for mentioning earlier on, um, in this talk. And this book that I wrote, You Are Not Alone for Parents and Caregivers, I wrote this book as a way to provide parents with a guide for how to think about youth mental health, how to think about, okay, what do I do when there's a problem? How do I know if there's a problem? How do I talk to my kid if there's a problem? Who do I talk to get my kid help? And what do different mental health conditions look like? Which is all in my book. And so it's a really simple read, a simple guide for kids, for parents on how to best take care of their kids. So I came up with this concept known as the distress radius as a helpful tool for parents to be able to know whether or not a kid might be experiencing some difficulty. So if you start to notice that a kid is struggling at home, to be curious as to whether or not they're also experiencing difficulty or exhibiting these behaviors outside of the home. Are we seeing this in their interactions with friends, with extended family members? Are we seeing this in interactions in school or in their extracurriculars? And if we notice that this behavior is being observed in multiple settings that are outside of the home, that go beyond the walls of the home, then that is an indicator that things need to be looked into and that there's an actual issue. In terms of how to talk to your kids about a mental health concern that you have, in the book, I mentioned this approach that I call look, listen, and lock in. I've already talked about this earlier about the importance of being able to notice your kid. First and foremost, we are so busy when we are getting ready in the morning, when we're getting our kids ready for school, when we come home, the bedtime routine, dinners, that sometimes we're so caught up in getting through those moments that we might not be able to fully notice our kids and changes in our kids. But it's really important to notice your kid, like really focus on how your kid is behaving each and every day. So if you notice this pattern, you want to be able to communicate the changes that you've noticed. So, what does that actually look like in real time? You can say to your kid, you know what, Billy, I have noticed that it takes you a long time to get out of bed in the morning. I've noticed that you've skipped out of football practice for the last 2 weeks. I've noticed that you no longer sit and eat dinner with us. I'm curious as to what might be behind some of those changes that I've noticed. So, to be very specific about the changes that you've noticed, rather than saying things like, you look like you are super sad, that you're super anxious. What's going on? You want to be able to highlight the specific behaviors because also when you do that, you're communicating to your kid, I notice you. I actually am looking out for you, especially when there are kids who are experiencing the feeling that nobody notices them, life is no longer worth living, there's no purpose. Once you start that conversation with your kid and you brought up the pattern that you've noticed in some of these behavioral changes, you want to hear from them what they think might be driving that change. So you want to listen with curiosity. Us as parents, we always want to jump in immediately whenever a kid is experiencing or voicing some sort of distress. No, 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 don't worry about that. That's not a big deal at all. No, you'll be okay. We're minimizing and invalidating that kid's experience, and we're also closing the door on an opportunity for that kid to connect with you. They're being vulnerable with you, sharing what is actually going on. But when you shut that down, providing reassurance, the only thing that you are doing in that moment is mitigating your anxiety. So there is absolutely no parent in the world that wants to see their kid suffer, that wants to see their kid struggle. So you provide that immediate reassurance, you minimize the significance of it rather than sitting back and listening with curiosity. So literally, when you are talking with your kid, if you need to sit on your hand so that you don't interrupt, please do so. And then you want to lock in. And what that means is you hear what your kid is saying about what might be driving some of the behavioral changes. And you could say, I wonder, have you thought about ways in which um, you can make this better or ways in which this could get better? Because you want to hear from your kid first if they thought about any strategies or resources to tap in before you jump in and be like, we got to bring you to the doctor right now. They might have already gone to talk to the school counselor. They might have already talked to the school psychologist and you had no idea. So you want to hear first about what strategies they think would be helpful. But you don't want to provide them any strategies right away because the strategies and the support that you might be offering may not actually be what that kid needs and may not actually be helpful because it's not what that kid needs in that moment. You're going to get dismissed. Kids are going to be like, Mom, this is annoying. Why you keep talking to me about how I'm doing and, just stop bothering me. But you got to keep showing up each and every day because that shows that you notice your kid. And you're basically initially planting the seed when you have that first conversation about how are you doing? What's going on? I've noticed this. And with each interaction in which you check in with your kid, you're basically watering that seed such that over time it may blossom into this whole thing where out of nowhere, 4 months later, your kid comes into your room and they're like, Mom, I'm actually really struggling. But if you had not planted that seed and had not showed up each and every day watering it, there would have been no way in which you would have known that your kid was distressed. So I want to make sure that we have time for questions. Um, but this is the cover of the book. And people seem to like the book, but I do want to let you know that all of the money that is made from the book goes straight to NAMI. It does not go to me, it goes straight to NAMI to support all of our amazing workshops across the country. And so I highly recommend that you share with others this book. That is a resource. And again, it will be helpful for NAMI. So thank you very much. And yeah, look forward to any questions that you all might
Dr.
have.
Crawford, how have you managed in 1 hour to share all of this information from this amazing book? I loved so much the way that you talked about this information overload that you just explained it in such a lovely way. As Jerry said, you have the empathy and the science, but because of all of this, we need different tools today. Our same tools will not work. And certainly the importance of the modeling, the naming emotions, and then talking about this isn't therapy, this look, listen, lock in, but being there, being curious and being non-judgmental. There's a question that came in, and then I'm going to turn it over to some of our people that
Mm-hmm.
are here. But this question, there's a very popular question here. In that moment of freezing and emotional reactivity and acting out, tell me, how can I help my child in that moment?
In that moment, the only thing that you should be focused on is just being there. Oftentimes we say a lot of things. Calm down, calm down. No, it's okay. It's actually adding more noise, it's adding more fuel, it's further activating the kid. And what you really want to do is you really want to bring them down. So if you do need to say something to them, make sure you're saying it in a calm, slow way because the idea is for them to go from to here. And think about with the baby too, right? It's going to be all right. It's okay. And to think about it in that same way when your kid is like wilding out, right? Just be there, whether you are sitting on the other side of the room, whether you are in the house and you're still there and you didn't leave, just by virtue of being there, that really matters. Because oftentimes, as parents, when we keep seeing these behaviors, we're like, you know what? I'm tired of this. I'm done. And you walk away. For the kids who you notice are freezing, again, you can be there and that could be a time in which you do a lot of out loud thinking and talk about times in which you've experienced something bad. And one reaction that you might have had was shutting down. And so using moments of you being open and vulnerable with your kids around how you've reacted to things in the past might make the kid be like, whoa, mom experienced that? Oh, maybe she'll understand. And then that could be one way of opening up, but it's going to take some time.
Excellent. I've heard you say they get their calm from us. Do whatever you can to calm down in that moment. Don't fix it for them. Dr. Shannon, you have a question.
Yes, I have a question because uh, even with my own children, navigating their disappointments in high school, just living life, not making a team or being on a team and not being allowed to play, things that happen to them in high school, the kind of disappointments and the kind of things that they go through. How do we pick up the signs and how do we help navigate them? Because now both my children are getting close to 30 and they have begun to share some things with my wife and I that affected them in high school that we didn't have a clue about. And if we had had some understanding about it, we could have navigated the situations better than we were able to do because if they didn't tell us. But so how do we pick up the signs of when a child is being disappointed, especially when you have children going to a predominantly white school and things like that that happen to them, like my son being on a basketball team and not allowed to play, knowing that he had the skill level to do that, and my daughter not being selected to be on a talent show because she was African American, and that affected her, and some of the things like that that they had to navigate life, and now they have begun to share those things with us. So, how do we pick up on those things, especially? How do we help them to be moral in an immoral society, as Niebuhr stated one time? So, how do we do that?
Yeah. So it's really tough. And I think one way in which I think about doing it is you could start off by being vulnerable yourself about difficult experiences that you had in high school. Now, what that could actually look like while you're driving in the car, and we're not doing all of this in one interaction. This is over time, right? This doesn't just start when you notice that one bad thing. This should be happening all along. For those who have younger kids, like start now. But you want to have these conversations about what disappointment looked like for you when you were younger, how you dealt with disappointment. Just by sharing stories, by opening up, hopefully that will just naturally make it easier for a kid to share their disappointment with you. And if you are concerned that there might be a disappointment that they're experiencing that's racially motivated, to share those stories about when you experience racism, when you were subjected to a microaggression, to talk about those things openly because you know that your kids are experiencing them. And to not to discuss them is like denying their kids' experience because you know it's happening, right? And then also, in terms of how to know if something's going on with your kid or if they're really disappointed, um, I do think that and it's so hard for us nowadays. We're not really good about sitting around and having dinner and like having dinner time together because all these kids are in a bajillion and one activities. We're busy. When we do have dinner, we're on our email and what have you. But if you can be intentional about creating dedicated time to check in about how you are doing and to do that consistently would be great. And I see we have
Thank you.
one
Thank
more
you.
question.
One.
Mhm.
Jerry, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Yes. One thing that you mentioned in your book that I thought was really good, what in the beginning part, when people are questioning whether there might be something wrong, was parents that's like see too much, are reading too much in, versus parents that want to sort of deny what they're seeing. Could you talk a little bit about that? I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, it could be hard. Like if you have your own history of mental health related challenges, you wouldn't want your kid to go through that experience too. So you might be like hyper aware of all these different changes and be curious if this might be consistent with depression because you know a lot about depression because you went through it firsthand versus someone who does not have that mental health knowledge base at all, that experience, and might not pick up on anything. So that's why I love the distress radius model because that could be used whether you already have your own knowledge base of mental health related issues or not, you can always go back to thinking about how is this kid actually functioning. So the person who's like picking on everything, if you look back and you're like, actually, the kid is going to school, the kid has friends, I might be overreacting here. So the distress radius could be really helpful.
Last question. I noticed that Bruce Perry, who has been with us, was endorsed this amazing book. So for the teachers that are listening, we, as you know, and many of our listeners know, those children in the classroom need to feel like they are wanted, accepted, like they belong. So talk for a moment to the teachers. What do you want to say to them at this time?
I know all of the teachers on this call love their kids. They love being around kids. They love having the opportunity to shape the minds of the kids who are sitting in front of them each and every day. But we oftentimes are curious about kids when things are going wrong. We're curious about the kids who are acting out. We're curious about the kids who are going through some difficulty. But I really encourage all teachers to be curious about the kids when they're doing well. To be curious about the kids who aren't really doing much. They're just sitting there. They're, getting by. But we have to be curious about all of the kids because, like I mentioned before, there are kids who are in the free state, who are disconnected, who might have experienced trauma, and we'll never know that. But let's kind of step away from focusing on kids with the disruptive behavior because if we focus on kids who are just being kids, who are doing great things, then perhaps they're less likely to go on to develop that bad behavior because we'll be able to catch it a lot sooner because it'll be like, whoa, Billy, we were just talking the other day. So I know it's hard to do, but continue to lean into forming connections with your individual students as best as you can.
Fabulous, fabulous, Dr. Crawford. It's such an honor to have you here today. Go to the website, lots of upcoming programs. This has been exceptional. Thank you so much.
Thank
Pleasure.
you.
Thank you, everyone. See you next time.